In this video, I will show you how you can change your game from a blinding mess into something you can clearly focus on, even giving you a tactical advantage. Now, if you're just after the quick solution, then the simple answer is to disable your PostFX settings altogether, as this will more than likely improve your visibility compared to what you're running for daytime raids. But if you'd like to fine-tune your settings for the perfect experience, stick around, because I'm going to explain which PostFX sliders you should be adjusting for the best competitive edge. Alright, let's jump into the best all-round settings for maps like Customs, Woods, Shoreline and Reserve, maps you'd typically be using night vision on. As for Factory, I will touch on the best settings at the end, because the lighting on this map is totally different, and requires the use of a few different settings. As for Interchange, you don't need NVGs for this map. If you're interested in the best settings for Interchange, check the links down below in the description. Starting off with brightness, you want this on the lowest possible value, which is -100. This will reduce the amount that lights and flashlights affect your vision in raid. Next, saturation. All this will do is make everything green or the respective NVG colour more enhanced, and won't increase your clarity, so we want this on the lowest possible value, -100. There does seem to be a bug with the saturation slider though. It's a little quirky. Every time I go back into the PostFX menu, the saturation resets from -100 to 0 again. So keep in mind that you'll need to change your saturation every time you look at your PostFX settings. This could just be me, but I mean it's worth mentioning anyway. Clarity. This is really helpful for adding definition to NVGs, so I'd recommend using it. This will reduce your FPS slightly, but try it out and see if it's a trade-off you're willing to make. Colourfulness. Unlike saturation, this actually does help with definition on NVGs, so I'd recommend turning this up to the max. Luma Sharpen. Again, this adds definition. It could make things a bit too dark for your liking, so play around with it and find a value that you like. This will also affect your FPS a little. Finally, Adaptive Sharpen. This is completely preferential. It will sharpen up the image if you need it, but I'd probably recommend using the sharpness setting in the graphics menu first, as it's a little less demanding on your GPU. This leads me onto the graphics settings themselves. There's no need to change anything here from what you'd use in regular daytime raids, though I would say it's worth mentioning about anti-aliasing. A lot of people have turned it off for additional performance, but if you can, I'd recommend using at least FXAA or TAA to smooth out the image slightly. As NVGs are slightly grainy, you'll really benefit from smoothing out your image. It'll make targets way easier to spot. I'd also like to point out that these settings will work with any other night vision goggles too, whatever you can afford. I'm just using the most clear, expensive ones, as it's easiest to show off the effect that these settings have on your game. Now, I want to show you the settings for Factory. Arguably one of the hardest maps to comfortably use NVGs on. As you can see, the settings we're using before is kind of doable, but a bit too bright for comfort. After a bit of experimentation, I've found a solid solution, and that's adjusting the color settings in the NVIDIA control panel. If you've watched any of my videos on PostFX in the past, you know how important it is to get this configured correctly. The main thing you want to adjust if your game's looking a bit washed out and too bright is gamma, and then start tweaking with your contrast and brightness. On screen now are some of the settings I like. These settings of course are experimental, so make sure you're happy with them first before you try them out in an online raid. The majority of the work here in making your PostFX right for you is remembering that we all have different hardware. My settings might not be good for you. I'm here to give you the tools to find out how to get the perfect results. If you want to learn how to properly set up your color settings in the NVIDIA control panel or AMD equivalent, then I highly recommend you watching this video here. The principles I talk about in this video are a game changer for anyone having problems seeing clearly in Tarkov.